Whew, I'm sweating. We are in Florida. It is May and it is hot. So I figure we're gonna play a fun little game all together. We'll see what happens. The video is gonna end either when the color of my skin ends up matching my shirt or I pass out, whichever one comes first. So let's go do it. I'm dizzy. Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and as you can see, we're not in Calgary. We're coming to you from Orlando, Florida. We're out here with Canon, checking out the brand new R10 and R7 cameras. Now, we do have the new lenses as well. We're playing with those. I think I should mention the new kit lenses, the 18-45, the 18-150. Those are pre-production, but the R7 and R10 are full production cameras we get to play with. Now, as usual, Jordan and I really appreciate that Canon have flown us out here to Florida, put us up in beautiful accommodations, and taken really good care of us. But also, as usual, with all of our reviews, we're gonna approach it objectively and unbiased. Now, Jordan is also shooting it on R7 today. Jordan, I believe what you're doing right now is taking pictures of the food court when the action's behind you.
What?
Yeah, there you go. It's called soccer. Look, it's fun.
They're so handsome.
We're gonna be covering a lot today, lots of photo, lots of video, and lots of gators. So right off the bat, the main feature you're going to notice here is we've got brand new cameras that are APS-C sensors, a 24 megapixel and a 32 megapixel sensor, but they're sharing the full frame RF lens mount that you find with cameras like the R5 and R6 and R3. So when Jordan and I first heard that these were APS-C based cameras, immediately we were thinking these are going to be stacked CMOS chips. You know, the industry seems to be going to these very fast readout chips, especially with APS-C being smaller. We figured these would be kind of pushing electronic shutter as a priority, but it looks like Canon's actually going in opposite direction. These are not backside illuminated. They're not stacked chips. Now, Canon assures us they're brand new sensors. They're not reusing things from the older line, but they're really pushing the mechanical shutter speeds here. See, the R10 can shoot up to 23 frames per second in electronic shutter mode, and the R7 can shoot up to 30 frames per second electronic shutter mode with autofocus in both cases. But the mechanical frame rate is 15 frames per second. That's still plenty fast, and I think Canon's really kind of hoping that people will use this more in mechanical shutter mode. So a different take does keep the cost down, and that is a big part of these platforms. So we're not normally evaluating two cameras at the same time in a video, but I'll try my best to differentiate the handling features here. The R10 is definitely a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, 0.94 pounds, 426 grams, roughly like, you know, under a quarter of a knock. It does feel very lightweight, actually very reminiscent of a Rebel SLR body. The grip itself is quite thin, but it is very deep, so if you've got long fingers, you're gonna be okay. Insert whatever jokes you want there. And it has a very traditional kind of command structure where I've got one command dial for my finger on top, and then another one on the back for my thumb. Autofocus on button, autofocus joystick, as I mentioned. So overall, actually, it has a very capable design structure. I'm finding it quite comfortable. Okay, so let's talk about the R7, but just bear with us on the leaf blower there. You take a look at the R7, this has a very similar body to like an R5 or R6 as far as slightly heavier than the R10, not by much, but definitely that bigger grip. And I do like the extra spacing it gives you for longer lenses. Now, the R7 is doing something very different here with the control structure. We do have the front command dial as normal, but on the back, they've now put it around the autofocus joystick here, very close to the AF on button. I've never seen that before in a camera. At first, I was skeptical. I'm like, this is weird, but I actually find it very, very usable. With my thumb right on the autofocus on button, it's touching the edge of that control ring, and I find it very easy to manipulate. Now, Jordan is actually finding that he's constantly changing his exposure compensation and not liking that. I myself, not having that problem, so it really probably just depends on how large your hand is. I will say though, I think there's a missed opportunity here. The R7 should have a command dial where the on-off button is in that familiar spot, because the R5 and R6 have triple command dials, and they could have easily done it here. That would have been fantastic. Now we're going to be testing autofocus quite a bit today. Both the R7 and the R10 use the same autofocusing system, the same algorithms, and interface which is actually more similar to how the R3 works than, say, the R5. So basically, you still have all your autofocusing modes. You can turn subject detection on or off in any of those modes. And this is really just determining what it's going to pick up and where the tracking is going to start. So for example, I'm using a lot of expandable autofocus area AF where I can just move the point across. Both cameras do have autofocusing joysticks on the back. That is really nice. And then whatever's nearby, subject detection picks that up. Or I can go to a flexible autofocusing area or just the wide zone, and then the subject detection will choose out of that whole area where it wants to track. And then I can use the joystick, if it picks up multiple subjects like people or animals, to just, click left and right and cycle through those. So it's a very intuitive system. It works nicely. Now, we've always talked about how great the animal detect is in Canon systems. These cameras are no exceptions. I mean, the animal subject detection is working great on the birds and gators that we're shooting here, and it is very accurate. When it picks up the eye or picks up the face, it does a great job of tracking that. One thing we are finding, though, we've got a lot of situations where birds are behind branches, and that's exactly where you want subject detection. You can see their eye through an opening. Now, to its credit, it does pick it up very nicely, but I'm in continuous autofocus, and it will often jump back and forth, second guessing to branches, then to the bird. So I'm finding in those situations it's easier just to use the subject detection, get my autofocus, and then stop autofocusing, take the shots that I want. It would be nice if I just leave it on continuous and it was a little bit stickier, but Jordan's also finding this in video as well. It's sometimes this second guessing when there's a lot of cover. If it's open, it just does a fantastic job. So being in a wildlife situation like this, I mean, it is nice that Canon's letting us borrow this 100 to 500, but APS-C does represent an interesting prospect for wildlife and sports photographers because you get that additional 1.6 times crop factor, and I'm finding that very, very useful here. But I am endeavoring to still try to use this 18-150 kit lens as well, which is great for a lot of the more in-close wildlife that I'm finding here. Now, one thing I do like to see is on the R7, we have the same situation as the R6 and R5, where when you turn the camera off, you can have the shutter closed just to try to keep dust off the sensor as you change lenses. Inexplicably, the R10 doesn't have that feature, and that does seem strange because I don't think it's like a very difficult engineering feat to accomplish that. All right, so we're gonna head to our next location. We had a fun time at Gatorland, but Ted, you're going the wrong way. All right, so as you can see, we're in the sports arena. We're going to talk about buffer rates. The first thing we're going to talk about is the R10. So first off, the R10 does boast a pretty impressive 15 frame per second shooting rate for mechanical shutter, but as far as the buffer goes shooting compressed RAW, we were only able to get about 2 seconds of shooting. That's about 30 shots before it had to slow down. Now, if I go to electronic shutter, it can push up to 23 frames per second. We're getting about 26 shots. So let's say with electronic shutter at the faster shooting rate, just over a second. Okay, but what about the more capable R7? So same thing, shooting just compressed RAW. It also boasts 15 frames per second in mechanical shutter mode. I was able to get about 100 shots before it slowed down. That's pretty good sustained burst rate. If you need the extra boost, you can then go to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. We were able to get 65 shots before it slowed down. So substantially better than the R10, and that's probably one of the main reasons why you might want to spend the extra money. As you can see, we found another sports arena to shoot in, but I've been told for soccer I don't have the right footwear, so I can't really play, but we can certainly talk about battery life. Now, starting with the R10, I have to be honest, when I heard that it was using a Canon LPE10 battery, pretty compact, didn't have high hopes, but actually for battery life, with the EVF, we're getting about 450 shots CEPA rated. I mean, that's not bad, and I have been shooting it for most of the day, and I'm still not anywhere close to half. And now I've got the Canon R7. Now in this case, I'm using the LPE6 NH batteries in there. Again, you'll probably have a bunch of those. And we're getting a very respectable 660 CEPA rated shots with the EVF. Again, shooting all day. I'm very happy with the battery life. Jordan's shooting as well, and he's saying the battery's holding up quite well. So yeah, it's not Sony a6600 territory, but as far as, battery life amongst APS-C compact cameras, we're actually doing really good on both. So we've had a pretty intense day of shooting so far, really testing the subject detection capabilities for wildlife and for people. Certainly we're shooting people in portraits or sports, movement, and I like the simplicity of an autofocusing system, much like a Sony a6100 or a6600, where, I can just set up an option to have tracking and continuous focus and just shoot 99% of my photography. And I'm really actually finding the Canon is giving me a really similar experience that way. I can go between the R7 or the R10. I'm really not noticing a difference in the autofocus experience. I'm finding my hit rate really high and it's very accurate. So overall, I'm finding this autofocus experience, I'd probably put it above Fujifilm's cameras right now, above Nikon's APS-C platform. Again, it feels very reminiscent of the excellent Sony system. And honestly, I think a lot of people are going to like that because of how easy it is to set up and how simple it is to use. Now, Jordan is having different experiences with video. Let's go to him and see how he is doing.
All right, it's Jordan to talk about the video capabilities on both of these cameras, and there's a lot that they have in common, starting with the fact that when you're recording 4K video at up to 30 frames per second, both of these give you an oversampled video image, which means it's going to be very detailed, quite nice low light performance on it as well. It's when you go faster than that that you start to see the difference. Now, the less expensive R10, it's only capable of doing 4K 60 if it applies an additional crop on top of your 1.6 crop, which will really zoom in your frame there. What's interesting with the R7 is there you can do full width 4K 60, but it's no longer oversampled, so you'll see considerably less detail there. The R7 can also record 4K 60 with a crop, but I found both of these modes fairly soft on them. So beautiful, sharp video with those oversampled modes, but there is definitely a picture quality hit when you go to 4K 60. It's also really nice. Both of these will give you the option to record 1080, 120 with the full width of the sensor. It's great that they offer that, but it is very soft, so I wouldn't use this if quality is important. One of the biggest differences between the two cameras is that the R7 does have in-body image stabilization, and it did a great job. Like sometimes I pushed it too hard, shooting with a 120mm lens, handheld, still a little bit bouncy, but in most situations did an awesome job. Now you do have electronic image stabilization in video mode with the R10. Just be aware that's going to crop your image, which will degrade picture quality, and it doesn't work really well if you're using slower shutter speeds. You're going to find these weird, bouncy, jittery artifacts. Another big difference is that the R10 does have a microphone jack, but no headphone jack, which I find essential if we're recording people talking like we are today, which is why I largely stuck on the R7. Another big difference is if you're shooting in high contrast scenes, only the R7 is going to offer you C-Log 3. Those flat profiles give you a lot more dynamic range. The big thing that makes it less useful on the R7 than some other competing cameras from other manufacturers is, I've bitched about it before, when you hit record, you're going to lose your histogram and your level. One other minor gripe, neither of these cameras offer the new quick manual white balance setting that we saw and really loved on the R3. It'd be great to see that in all Canon cameras going forward. Canon's been well known for good video autofocus for a while, and this actually gets some of the cool video functionality from the R3, a lot of the interface there. And you can just tap your subject to initiate tracking on it, and as long as the box stays on your subject, actually our autofocus performance was very good. The problem I have with both of these cameras is it will sometimes drift. Now, as long as you've got access to the touchscreen, that's not a problem. Just tap right back on your subject, and I found the autofocus doesn't really flutter very much when it does that. The problem that I have with this camera is a lot of the time I'll set up my shot with the touchscreen, then put it up to the electronic viewfinder. And when you do that, you have no way of reinitiating tracking if the focus drifts, except that you can recompose your shot and push in the center of the AF joystick. If you do that, it'll start tracking whatever's in the center of the frame, but you've already ruined your composition. In order to compensate for that, I really wish it worked like Nikon, where you still had your autofocus point selector, just use the AF joystick, put it on your subject, hit F on, and it starts tracking from that point forward. That'd be a better system. As is, this is passable, but it has annoyed me a lot. I definitely want to do some more controlled overheat testing when we do our full reviews of these cameras, but Canon is saying that if you're doing the oversampled 4K recording, both these cameras should last about an hour before overheating, and there shouldn't be any issues at all if you're doing the 4K 60 with a crop mode. If you need those longer record modes, your battery is going to be the limiting factor there. But I mean, it has been incredibly hot, and we haven't had an overheat warning. This has been quite a stress test. I'm inclined to take Canon at their words, and this is definitely a better camera for overheating than like an R5 or R6. So if you're doing some casual video shooting, I could see the R10 being an interesting option if you're not going to grade the footage, you're not too worried about wobbly footage. But if you're really into video, I think it's absolutely worth the premium to step up to the R7. I can't really think of many cameras in its price range that offer a competitive feature set, except a Panasonic GH5 II that offers you better 4K 60 recording, more assist tools. But remember, that autofocus is even more unpredictable than what we have on the R7, so that might sway your decision one way or the other.
All right, it's time to say goodbye to Florida, so let's wrap things up on these two cameras. Now again, we can't really open the raw files here. We've taken a look at JPEGs, but these are production cameras, so you'll be able to look at the sample galleries there on DPReview.com and download those and have a look when they are supported. But honestly, from the image quality I'm seeing, it's classic Canon, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, the files are good, but everything I'm getting out of the R10 looks like what I've seen out of Rebel SLRs, and everything I'm getting out of the R7 looks like what I've seen out of the EOS 90D. I mean, these are not stacked chips, as we've talked about. We're getting a little bit of rolling shutter. These aren't part of the new cameras that can shoot electronic shutter only with minimal rolling shutter. There's a little bit there, and I would honestly say that these are to be used really as classic mechanical shutter cameras. So between these two bodies, is it worth spending the extra money to get the R7? I think for a lot of people, yes. I mean, you do get a more rugged weather-sealed body, you're getting the built-in image stabilization, higher megapixel stills, certainly more video upgrades on this camera, and I do like the way that it handles. I think for a lot of enthusiasts, the R7 makes a lot of sense. The R10 though, it is lightweight, it is affordable. I honestly think they should have called this the Rebel 10, and really to me, it's very clear that what Canon's trying to do is not necessarily revamp their APS-C mirrorless line, but bring out these cameras to get users that might be looking at Rebel T7s or EOS 90Ds and say, no, it's really time to join the mirrorless market, and these are very similar analogs to do that. So if you're looking for a brand new camera, is one of these the right way to go? Possibly. I mean, the problem here is with the R10 at that price point, you've got other competition like the Fujifilm XS10, which arguably has a more sexy body, also has really nice handling, really nice controls, has built-in IBIS. I'd even argue the image quality is the same or maybe slightly better. And most importantly, it has a lot of excellent lenses that are purpose-built for the sensor. Whereas here, honestly, that's one of the big weaknesses. I feel like I'm using really large RF glass. And yeah, I'm fortunate we were able to bring a 50mm f1.2 or use the 100 to 500 zoom, but in a lot of cases I couldn't even hold them properly on the R10. They took up too much space, my fingers are crammed in there, and they were unbalanced on this body. So really, you've got an 18 to 45 kit lens, an 18 to 150 kit lens. These are options, but they're very entry-level options. Now, whether Canon will make more APS-C lenses for the RF lens mount in the future, well, that's something that we have to wait and see on. But, you know, you might not ever want to go past something like a general-purpose 18 to 150 kit lens, and certainly there are more compact RF lenses and smaller primes that you can use on here that are just lovely. Or maybe you're just going to adapt your old SLR glass. Then those are all options too. But I do still think that the R7 for the extra price point probably makes more sense. I can use bigger lenses on there with some balance, and they're not uncomfortable to hold. And of course, I still have all the same benefits that APS-C give us with, you know, making long lenses even longer, shooting wildlife and sports. Regardless, if you go either way with these cameras, you get something that handles very well, and most importantly, you get something with autofocus that just is effective, simple, accurate, easy to use. And there's a lot to be said for that. But hey, leave comments below. Let us know what you think about these two new cameras. I think there is some interesting potential here. We certainly had a great time out here in Orlando. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining us. When you see us again, we'll be back in Calgary very soon.